history fans, welcome back. It's Women's History Month, so today we're going to talk about some women of the ancient Roman world. Now on this channel already we've spoken about Boudica and Agrippina the Younger, two very important women when talking about the ancient Roman Empire / world. But we'll leave them be today and you can watch those other videos to find out more about them. So today we're going to start with Fulvia. Now I didn't really know much about her, so this research was actually really quite fun for me. Let's get into it. Now she's a really interesting lady and she slightly predates the Roman Empire and she's really influential around the time of Caesar's assassination. Yes, that's a pen holder. I love it. Anyway, the first record we have of her is actually about the very violent end that her husband faced. Her husband, Publius Clodius Pulcher, was a Roman politician who came from the wealthy upper class, but he represented the common people in politics. Now she accompanied him on lots of journeys and she even took an interest in his career. Now one day he was beaten to death by a mob during his campaign for office, and the mob was paid for by his rival, Titus Annius Milo, but Milo then stood trial for murder. Fulvia and her mother dragged his corpse all the way to the Roman forum, which in itself sparked a riot, not only because it gained the sympathy of the public that he was representing in politics, but it also showed his grieving family. How could you kill him? And the public's grief over the loss of their politician was marked with even more significance in a really public trial where Fulvia and her mother both gave evidence against Milo. We then hear about her next husband being elected tribune in 49 BC. When she marries Gaius Scribonius Curio, he's at the start of his political career, supporting the aristocratic lifestyle, but Fulvia's influence is really clear when he suddenly switches to the public faction, or the plebs, which shows a bit of backbone that the public hadn't really seen, and also gets him on the right side for support in politics. She then persuades her previous husband's supporters to support her new husband, and she encourages him to form a good or close relationship with Caesar because she understands the importance that that has in the political climate of Rome at that time. By this point she's a well-known figure in the Roman public's eye, and Curio dies in military service in Africa, and she then marries again a man she supposedly was already having affairs with whilst married to Clodius, the first husband. She gets married again in 44 BC. At this point she's like 36-ish, and this time she's marrying the Mark Antony. Again, when they marry, he's at the start of his career. He lacks this decisiveness that's needed, and Fulvia's impact can be seen again just as much on Antony as it was felt on Curio. Did that make sense? Yeah, her impact was felt as much on Antony as it was on Curio. She's basically just like raising these men up, giving them their career, you know. When Caesar dies 3 years later and Antony becomes one of the 3 co-rulers of Rome, the couple work together on a few revenge killings, and she helps him remove a fair amount of political enemies. They even kill Marcus Tullius Cicero, or Cicero, in 43 BC, and Cassius Dio's Roman history tells us that Fulvia takes the dead man's head, spits on it, takes out the tongue and pierces it with pins. But it's probably just a rumour started by those people that supported Cicero, considering that Cicero and Antony were fierce enemies. And Cicero was a very harsh critic of Antony. It's now 42 BCE and Fulvia is at the height of her power because Mark Antony and the other 2 rulers of Rome have gone off to pursue Caesar's assassins, and they've left her de facto co-ruler of Rome. This is where it goes slightly wrong for her. It goes wrong for her. In 41 BCE, she begins the hostilities against Octavian, who is the biggest threat to Antony as Caesar's adopted heir. She even raises 8 legions against Octavian because he tried to take credit for the pair's joint actions, so the things that Fulvia and Antony did, Octavian tries to take credit for, I believe, is what I got from the research. But basically she starts the Perusian War. She's the driving force in Antony's attempt to take power from Octavian. At this point she even becomes the first woman on a coin, which doesn't just show how serious she was, but it shows how important she was during this war, because on the coin she's displayed as winged victory, and this is at a time when the only other people on the coins are the 3 rulers of the triumvirate. Triumvirate. With her brother, she seizes 2 towns, but Octavian then besieges them. But this also shows us again her importance in the war, because the missiles that were thrown into the town to take it back have personal direct insults to her written on them. She then travels to Greece to convince Antony to sail on Italy, because Rome is already divided, and she is convinced the 2 leaders of the biggest naval forces to support Antony. But Fulvia suddenly dies of an illness in 40 BC. Antony's apparently already having his affairs with Cleopatra, and he then denies backing her. In 40 BC, Antony and Octavian are fighting at Brundisium, but they then decide to blame the whole thing on Fulvia so that their weak manhood alliance could survive. Antony goes back off with Cleopatra to the east, and Octavian has Rome. So they just stop fighting, they blame the whole thing on her. And I think the fact that they blamed the whole thing on her just as an excuse to stop fighting shows how important she is. She started this whole war. She stood up for what she believed in, and she was definitely a very powerful force to be reckoned with. And courageous as well as a strong political leader. Maybe there should have been 4 members of the triumvirate, because she definitely very nearly changed the course of Roman history, just as much as those men did. Argue with me in the comments, please. Now, let's just rewind to Fulvia's first husband, Publius Clodius Pulcher, and let's talk about his sister, Clodia Pulcher. Now, the couple also had a daughter called Clodia Pulcher, so I got a little bit confused in my research, but we can go back and talk about the daughter in another video if you like. You have to let me know. So his sister, Clodia Pulcher, is born in 96 BC. She's born into a noble family and then marries into another one. So she's definitely someone I feel like I should have known about before, especially considering Cicero calls her the Medea of the Palatine. Her grandmother is Octavia the Younger, the sister of Augustus. Her brother is the father of Valeria Messalina, who's the 3rd wife of Emperor Claudius, and she's friends with Agrippina the Elder, so she's got quite the connections across the empire. And her scandalous life is immortalised thanks to Cicero and apparently the poems of Catullus. So let's find out why she was so scandalous. Clodia is of course born into the Claudi family, which is one of the most ancient families of Rome that dates all the way back to the construction of the city. She has 3 brothers, one being Publius, we mentioned a second ago, and 4 sisters. It's not known where she lands, but she's somewhere in the middle. She's not the oldest, but she's not the youngest either. Along with Clodius, like we mentioned earlier, she also switches her name from the aristocratic to the plebeian in support of their politics, so her original name is Claudia and she changes it to Clodia. Her first scandal comes when unhappily marrying her cousin, Quietus Caecilius Metellus Celer. Now, despite them having a daughter together, Cecilia or Cecilia Metellus, who we will talk more about in a second as another infamous Roman woman. Despite them having her together, she has many affairs with other married men, probably including the poet Catullus, and slaves apparently. Now, the couple also had many arguments, quite often in public, so when he mysteriously dies in 59 BC, she's obviously suspected of poisoning him. As a widow, she had even more lovers, but one that caused particular scandal for her was Catullus's friend, Marcus Cullus Rufus. Now, when that affair, it wasn't an affair because she was a widow, when that relationship, when that love affair ended in 56 BC, when it ended in 56 BCE, she publicly accused him of attempting to poison her, which did lead to a murder trial. At this trial, though, Cicero is the one who defends Rufus. And Cicero's speech is recorded in Procalio, if you do want to read it. It's quite a good one. But Cicero is really quite harsh in his speech, as we know from before, because his biggest rival is Clodia's brother, Publius. So he's obviously gonna rip into her. The speech includes accusations of seduction, drunkenness, incest, and just disgrace, as he has never thought it his duty to engage in quarrels with any woman, especially with one whom all men have always considered everybody's friend rather than anyone's enemy. It's quite an amusing speech, which obviously means that Rufus is not found guilty. But what I think makes the whole thing even more amusing is that later Plutarch tells us that apparently Cicero was having an affair with Clodia as well himself. So maybe he was just jealous. After the trial, we don't really hear about Clodia again, so let's move on to her daughter. So if your mother's a notorious adulterer and supposedly the inspiration for the character Lesbia in Catullus's poetry, you've got a lot to live up to, and Cecilia Metella does it quite well. In 53 BC, her first scandal begins when she marries the politician on the same side of politics as her father, whose name is Publius Cornelius Lentulus Spinther. But of course, she has an affair. And for this affair, she chooses a man on the other end of politics to her husband and her father, and his name is Publius Cornelius Dolabella. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. If you haven't gathered from this video, everyone's names are like so similar. So I'm really sorry if I muddle them up and say the wrong name. But anyway, so Spinther divorces her in 45 BCE. And you might be like, what? That's not like a huge scandal. Have you seen like the rest of the Romans? Why on earth would he divorce her? Well, it turns out it was a massive scandal because Dolabella was married to Tully, who was the daughter of Cicero, who wrote all about it in his letters. So it's a huge scandal made up of huge politicians and Cicero. So she's only 20, she's divorced and disgraced and just sent back to her family. But they're going to make good use of her. Her cousins use her for political conspiracies and to make her seduce a fair few of Caesar's friends in order to get their family name cleared after they've been defeated in recent battles. She of course has other lovers, a few of which we know. One is another poet who writes about her under the name Perilia, and another very wealthy man, a Sopo. Sadly though, we don't know how or when she died. But I think that's enough confusing Roman names for today. If you'd like to learn more about Roman women, please let me know in the comments and we can learn about their stories together. Don't forget to like and subscribe and all that jazz. And I'll see you on Wednesday. Bye!